So, like a lot of men, I have not always been great at following instructions. Right? So I get a new appliance or maybe a new piece of furniture that takes some assembly, and usually I try and figure it out on my own without reading the instructions first. Right? And most often, after a while, I end up giving up. And I have to pull out the instructions and follow them anyway. And I just hope I didn't mess things up too much in the process. Right? In my defense, sometimes these instructions that come are just too confusing, right? There's too much useless information, right? So I got a kitchen appliance a few months ago, just a simple little appliance. It came with a small book of instructions that came in 11 different languages, and it was just too much to deal with. Well, as I've gotten older, I think I've gotten a little bit wiser, and I realize how good it is, how smart it is to follow the instructions that come with it. Well, this morning we're looking at Psalm 1, and it's a psalm for learning. Very appropriate with school starting again very soon. Right? Psalms for learning, there's a number of them in the book of Psalms. They fit into the category of wisdom literature, along with books like Proverbs and Ecclesiastes and the book of Job that we've talked about the last couple weeks. Books that seek godly wisdom, right? That pursue learning about life. Wisdom literature gives God's instructions for living. They're God's life instruction booklet. How we were designed to work, and they tell us how to live wisely instead of foolishly. And we would be wise to pay attention to these books, to follow the instructions that they give, and to learn from the one who designed us, who created us, who knows how we work best, how we live best, who knows what will cause us to break down and have troubles, and what will cause us to live well and find blessing. Well, if you read this category of wisdom literature, you'll find out that they often divide the world into two categories. You have the righteous and the wicked. Or in other words, the other words they use are, you have the wise and the foolish. Now, they're not very politically correct. There is no in between here where they say, you know what, you just live whatever way you wish. You do what you want. Believe what you want, and if you're convinced that that's right, if that works for you, just fine. Go for it. No, there's none of that. Very clearly defines right and wrong, wise and foolish. There's also a lot of love and grace. You can't read this without knowing the love and the grace of Jesus Christ and the power of forgiveness that God gives. But at the same time, there's no gray area here. There's clear categories of right and wrong. And Psalm 1 invites us to evaluate our own lives, to look inside my own heart, to look at my own actions, my own choices, and to say, am I living in wisdom or am I living in foolishness? Let's read Psalm 1. It's not that long. We'll read the whole thing. It says, blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way that sinners take, or sit in the company of mockers, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord, and who meditates on his law day and night. That person is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither. Whatever they do prospers. Not so the wicked. They are like chaff that the wind blows away. Therefore the wicked will not stand in judgment, nor the sinners in the assembly of the righteous. For the Lord watches over the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked leads to destruction. Wicked or foolish? I mean, wise or foolish? Now, I doubt that any of us would stand up and declare, you know what, I choose foolishness. I prefer to be a fool over a wise person. I doubt we would do that. But I know that every single one of us slips into foolishness. Right? There's moments in our lives, maybe regularly, where we ignore God's direction for living and we try living life our own way. We do what is wicked, what is wrong, and we end up experiencing the painful consequences that result. Right? That's what our sinful nature does to us. The sinful nature that we are born with, that we live with, encourages us, leads us to choose foolishness, even if we don't want to choose wickedness instead of goodness and righteousness. Now, in verse 1 here, shows us the progression that Satan uses to lure us away from wisdom and towards foolishness. He moves us from walking to standing to sitting. Let's look at that progression here. First of all, it says that we find ourselves walking in step with the wicked. Have any of you, as children, gotten yourself in trouble? And when you're talking with your teacher or your parents or whoever else caught you, the words come out of your mouth, well, everybody else was doing it. Right? That's your excuse. That's your reason for the bad thing you did. Everybody else was doing it. I said those words as a kid. Right? Everybody else was doing it, so I just did it too. I walked in step with everybody else. And I found myself doing something that I never really should have or would have chosen to do on my own. That's what Psalm 1 is talking about here, right? We walk in step with the wicked. Leads us to wickedness. So it's inviting us to pay attention to who we're walking with, who we're living life with. If we are walking with the foolish, then we will end up doing foolish things that hurt ourselves and hurt the people around us. But if we're walking in step with the wise, we will end up doing wise things that bring blessing to ourselves and bring blessing to the people around us. Now, what's surprising in this is that the foolish people that often we are walking in step with don't always seem so foolish to us. This psalm uses the word wicked, walking in step with the wicked. And wicked sounds so terrible, evil. Well, they're not necessarily horrible people. They're not necessarily doing evil. They're just the people who are not following God's direction, who are choosing their own way of living instead of God's way of living. And often those people are successful. They're popular at school. They're good at work. They're successful in business and often in politics, right? Being successful, popular, is not the same as being wise. There is no substitute for reading the instruction manual that God gives. This is where wisdom is found. And so step 1, the psalm says, is surround yourself with wise people. Get your advice, your direction for living from trusted, godly people. So ask yourself, who are you getting your life advice from? Who are you walking with? Who are you looking up to and learning from? Right? There's plenty of people who want to give you advice. Advertisers on TV and on your phone want to convince you how you should spend your money. The popular kids at school want to show you how you should treat other kids. The news source that you choose to get your news from wants to tell you how you should think and what you should believe about politics and the way the world should be run or the way the world is. The television shows you watch want to convince you of what's the cool thing to do, what's right and what's wrong. Your coworkers want to show you how you should work, how you should do your job. Look at them and ask yourself, are they really the ones that you want to learn from? Are they really the ones that you want to trust so much that you will shape your life decisions by what they say? You will imitate them. A wise person will look for and listen to the advice of trusted believers who are following God's way. And that might take some effort. Right? It's easiest just to go along with what the advertisers and television and news sources and popular kids tell you. It will take an effort to follow wise people. It might mean you change the company that you keep. It might mean you develop some new friendships and leave some old ones behind. Watch out. Know that the easiest choice will always be to walk in step with the foolish. And if you fall in step with the foolish and walk with them, then the next thing you'll find yourself doing is you will find yourself standing in the way of sinners. You'll begin to linger there with them. You'll feel more comfortable with them. Right? That change from walking to standing is a bit more permanent now, isn't it? You start agreeing with them. Their foolishness begins to sound wise. The wrong they do begins to feel right. And without you even realizing it sometimes, you begin to shift your values, your morals, your principles, and your priorities. And honestly, it so often feels good just to fit in with the ways of the world rather than to stand out because of Jesus. It feels good to stand here with them. Right? It feels good to pick on the unpopular kid at school along with everybody else rather than defending her. Right? That's risky. It feels better just to go along with everyone else. It feels good to selfishly buy everything you want as the advertisers tell you to do, as your friends tell you to do, rather than just giving away to others generously. It feels good to drink whatever you want and however much you want, just like your friends are doing around you. It feels good to parent your kids so that they're popular rather than godly. Right? It's comfortable. And after walking with the foolish for a little while, it's easiest just to settle into that lifestyle, just to do what the world says you should be doing. And finally, after you've been standing there for a while, you just settle in and you live there. Right? We sit in the company of mockers. We're comfortable being the foolish ones now. And so we choose to ignore God's instruction for living and just to trust our own wisdom now. Trust the ways of the world. And sometimes we can do this while looking very Christian, right? We go through the motions of faith on Sundays, one day a week, and then the other days we live foolishly with the world. There's a word for that. It's called hypocrisy. But we're comfortable living that way. Put in our time on Sunday, live the way we want the rest of the days. We've journeyed down that path of foolishness until we found a comfortable home over here, fitting in with the world. Well, verse 2. Verse 2 gives us two evidences to look for in our own lives if we want to know that we're living in wisdom or living in foolishness. Are we comfortable over here? Have we deceived ourselves? Are we living as hypocrites? Or are we truly living out God's wisdom? Well, here's the clues to look for. The first clue is, are we living with a godly attitude? A godly attitude. Right? The question to ask ourselves, I need to ask myself, you need to ask yourself, is why do you follow God and obey his instructions when you do? Why do you do it? Why do you go to church, and why do you read the Bible? Why do you give generously? Why do you volunteer your time? Why do you choose to be good and honest and kind? Do you do those things because you have to? Is your attitude that you have to because it's a requirement that God gives, so you have to check it off the list and you're kind of resigned to living this way? Or do you do it maybe because you're afraid of God? You're afraid of his anger if you don't do it? You're afraid of his punishment that might come? Well, those are not the attitudes that wisdom has. Verse 2 tells us that wisdom delights in following God's life instructions, in living out his way, his wise way. To delight is to experience a high degree of pleasure and joy. So for the wise, God's instructions for life bring pleasure and joy. That's why they do it. Not because they have to, but because they want to. Right? They find joy in learning more about God. They find joy in giving generously. They find joy in serving and volunteering. They find joy in loving others by being honest and kind and gracious and forgiving. They find joy. Wisdom knows that God's directions for living are given in order to help us live as we were designed to live. Right? It knows that following God brings delight and joy. That's a different attitude than most of us live with, I would guess. I would guess most people want just enough wisdom to satisfy God, and then enough foolishness that they can enjoy life. Right? So we hold on to our favorite sin. We hold on to our favorite foolishness. Don't want to let go of that. We ask ourselves, how much foolishness can I get away with before I get in trouble with God? My guess is none of you have visited a city in the United States called Fallon, Nevada. There is no reason why you would have visited Fallon, Nevada. I bring it up because that city is called the arsenic capital of the United States. Arsenic is, in high doses, a deadly poison, right? Well, in Fallon, Nevada, they have the highest level of arsenic in their drinking water than any other city in the United States. Makes you not want to visit that city, doesn't it? Right? Because they're drinking poison more than most people. Now, they could fix this problem. For $10 million, they could build a water treatment plant that would take all of the arsenic out of their water and make their water pure and clean. That's kind of expensive, so they're choosing not to do that. Instead, they'll just keep drinking the arsenic. One of the residents was quoted as saying, "It only bothers you if you're not used to it." They've gotten used to it. They've gotten used to drinking poison. Isn't that how we treat sin in our lives? Ask the question, do we want to follow God? Do we want to live God's ways? And we say, yes, because I know that brings peace and that brings purpose and goodness. That's the way I'm created to live. That's like drinking clean water, right? God's way is drinking clean water. Am I willing to pay the price to get there, to do that? No. Because I don't really want to leave the pleasures of sin. I don't want to leave behind the benefits of greed. I don't want to leave behind the fun of selfishness that gets me what I want. I don't want to leave behind the gains that I get from cheating. I don't want to leave behind the joy I get from laziness. And so we keep drinking the poison of sin. We're choosing it, and we're getting used to it. It only bothers you if you're not used to it. It doesn't even bother us sometimes anymore because we're just used to it. Wisdom does not get used to it. Rather than delighting in what it can get away with, wisdom delights in God's way of living. And that delight then is shown, that godly attitude becomes godly action. Right? Wisdom follows God's instructions for living. It knows that true delight is found in this book, in God's instructions for living. And so it digs in to find that path and then chooses to follow that path. Wisdom opens the Bible, finds wisdom, goes to church, studies in small groups, gains more insight, listens to God in prayer, discerns God's leading and direction, and then puts it into action. Right? It chooses to live out what it has learned, trusting God. Recognizing that living wisely is not always easy. Sometimes that leads to really difficult choices. But wisdom knows that that's the right way to live. And it's worth it for the joy and delight that it brings. So every day, you and I are choosing how we will live. Will we live wisely or will we live foolishly? Remember, there's no in between. It's wise or foolish, right or wicked. The psalm ends by showing us the difference between the wise and the foolish. If we choose wisdom, if we choose to strive to live God's way, delighting in living like Jesus, here's what our lives will look like. Verse 3. That person, the wise person, is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither. Whatever they do prospers. Beautiful. Our life, it says, will be like a strong tree. We will tap into the source of strength that gives solid rooting and grounding to our lives. And those roots will hold us strong even in the storms of life, will hold us in God's strength. And we will find purpose for living and growing. We will bear fruit, it says. We will be productive. We will live with meaning that gives life purpose. We will discover life that works the way that God intended it and designed it to live. It's beautiful. It's a picture of strength and purpose and meaning that every person longs for in life. But not so the wicked. Verse 4. Not so the wicked. They are like chaff that the wind blows away. Instead of being a strong tree, They're like chaff, it says. Let me tell you about the Old Testament harvest that's talking about here. When they would harvest their grain, often wheat, what they would do is they'd put it all in a big pile that they've harvested, right? And then they would beat the grain to separate the good kernel that they want from the useless stalk and skin that they want to throw away and be done with. That's garbage. And so they'd beat it down, and then they would take these forks and they would toss it up in the air. If it was a breezy day, that's even better. Because as they toss it in the air, the heavy grain, the seed, would fall right back to the ground. And the chaff, this outer skin, would just blow away. It's light and useless. It's garbage. And the wind would take it away and be gone. So unlike the tree that stands strong even in the storms, it says the wicked will not stand. But not only will they not stand, but the slightest breeze will blow them away. Forgotten, useless, meaningless. That's what life is for them. Purposeless. The foolish will experience not only the disappointments in this life, but they will also miss out on the joy and delight of living life as we're designed to live. And they will miss out on the delight and joy of eternity as well. Verse 6. For the Lord, verse 5, therefore the wicked will not stand in judgment, nor the sinners in the assembly of the righteous. For the Lord watches over the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked leads to destruction. The life blown away, now and for eternity. So for many of you here, younger ones, school's about to start. There's a lot for you to learn this year, and I hope you do well, and I hope you come out smarter on the other side. But school is in session now for all of us here, young and old. And it's not necessarily about getting smarter. It's God's school of being wise, of learning wisdom. We have a lot of life lessons to learn, wise instructions to follow. Are each one of us, are you and I willing to sit in God's classroom and to learn? Am I willing to choose to walk with the wise instead of the foolish, and then to stand with them, and then to sit there, to settle in and make myself comfortable living life God's way, choosing wisdom, the wisdom of God instead of the foolishness of this world? Am I willing to trust that following God's instructions is the best way to live and experience the delight and the joy that comes from settling in to God's wise ways? Blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way that sinners take, or sit in the company of mockers, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord, and he meditates on that law day